I never thought a gravel driveway could turn into the biggest fight I'd ever had with another grown man, but that's exactly what happened. And looking back now, I still laugh at how fast things spiraled once somebody decided my land was easier to take than it was to ask for. My name's Ethan Walker, and back in 2017 I bought 11 acres outside a little place called Red Hollow, Tennessee. Nothing fancy, just woods, rolling ground, and enough quiet to hear yourself think. I'd spent years working long construction contracts all over the state, saving every extra dollar I could. And when I finally bought that land, it felt like breathing for the first time in years. I built my house the following spring with my own hands and a little help from my brother Luke. Long days, busted knuckles, cheap beer on the tailgate at sunset, honestly some of the best memories I've got. My driveway was long, about a quarter mile of packed gravel cutting from the county road up through the trees to the house. Cost me a decent amount to build because I had drainage put in right and compacted stone laid thick enough for Tennessee storms. I took pride in it. Sounds silly maybe, but when you've spent years building something from nothing, every detail matters. Behind my property sat another stretch of land, around 60 acres that used to be cattle pasture decades ago. Nobody had touched it in forever. Overgrown grass, broken fencing, brush so thick deer practically disappeared inside it. I always figured eventually some developer would come along and buy it. That part never surprised me. What surprised me was how they introduced themselves. Spring of 2023, a black SUV pulls into my driveway around lunchtime. Out steps a guy named Bryce Dalton, mid-40s, polished boots, pressed shirt. Looked like the kind of man who'd smile while figuring out how to bill you for breathing too loud. He introduced himself as vice president of Dalton Ridge Development. Said they'd closed on the 60 acres behind me and planned to build upscale homes. I said, "Congratulations." He laughed like we were friends already. Then he unrolled blueprints on the tailgate of my truck. Beautiful layout, paved streets, drainage, utility lines, cul-de-sacs, whole thing. Then he tapped his finger right across my driveway. That's where we'd access the site. I looked at him. He kept smiling, like I was supposed to nod and hand him the keys. I asked, "What exactly are you offering?" He said, "Well, naturally we'd maintain the road while construction's underway." I actually laughed, not trying to be rude. "It just came out," I said. "Maintaining damage you create isn't compensation." That smile got tighter. He said most folks around here appreciated growth, helped each other out. I leaned on the truck and said, "You're not helping me. You're asking to run a commercial bill through private property." He folded up the plans slower this time. Said he was sure we could revisit it. Then he drove off. I figured that was that. 2 weeks later, I got woken up by engines. Not one, 6, heavy diesel. It was barely after 6 in the morning, and dump trucks were rolling right down my driveway, straight toward the rear line. Dust everywhere. I came outside in boots and a t-shirt and saw an excavator following behind like it was a parade. For a second, I honestly thought somebody had made a huge mistake. Then I spotted Bryce standing near the back fence talking into his phone. I walked straight down there. He saw me and waved. Actually waved. Like this was perfectly normal. I said, "What exactly are you doing?" He didn't even blink. Said their legal team reviewed county access maps and believed the route qualified because it connected to the public road. I just stared at him, because it was so absurd I almost couldn't process it. Then I said real calm, "Bryce, this is private land." He shrugged, said if I had concerns I could contact their attorney. Then he turned his back and kept talking on his phone. That part got under my skin more than anything. Not the trucks, not the dust, the arrogance. Like I was some inconvenience standing on land I'd paid for. I called my attorney, Mark Henderson, a local guy I'd known almost 10 years. Smart, dry sense of humor. Never wasted words. I told him what was happening. He got quiet for maybe 3 seconds, then laughed. Actually laughed. He said, "Ethan, no, that's trespassing. Commercial trespassing. And if they damaged anything, it gets expensive real fast." By noon, he had a certified demand letter sent over. Stop immediately. Vacate the driveway. Further access would trigger legal action. Simple, clear, professional. Bryce ignored every word. The next morning, there were more trucks. By afternoon, they'd left tire ruts deep enough to shake my pickup when I drove over them. One drainage edge was collapsing. Gravel scattered. Dust coating my porch furniture. Luke came by that evening and stood there looking down the drive with me. He whistled, then said, "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" I looked at him, and for the first time all week, I smiled. Because, yeah, I absolutely was. And Bryce Dalton had no idea what was getting delivered to my gate the next morning. At 7:30 the next morning, a flatbed truck rolled up carrying 12 feet of powder-coated steel and enough hardware to secure a small fortress. Bryce had no clue what he was driving into. My brother Luke showed up with coffee in one hand and a socket wrench in the other. We'd already poured anchor points years earlier when I first built the driveway because I'd always planned to put up a gate eventually. Never got around to it. Funny how life works sometimes. By 9 o'clock, that steel gate was standing solid at the entrance. Black, heavy, clean lines, industrial-grade hinges, massive padlock, and legally planted on my property line. We barely had time to wipe our hands before the first truck came around the bend, then another, then 3 pickups, then a concrete delivery. Every one of them slammed brakes and backed up, engines idling, guys climbing out, phones coming up, nobody smiling. I was standing 20 feet away sipping coffee. Bryce arrived 10 minutes later in a white SUV moving way too fast for gravel. He got out already angry. Didn't even say hello. He walked straight to the gate and yanked on it hard enough to rattle the hinges. Then turned around. "Open this," I said. "Morning to you too." He pointed toward the back property. "You're blocking an active build site." "No," I said. "I'm standing on my driveway." His jaw tightened. "We have crews scheduled. Materials arriving. Equipment rented by the hour." I shrugged. "That sounds expensive." Luke actually coughed, trying not to laugh. Bryce ignored him. "What do you want?" There it was. The first honest question he'd asked. I told him plain. If Dalton Ridge wants access to my private property, redo it legally. Written agreement. Logged access. $200 every trip. He stared at me, then laughed like I'd lost my mind. $200 a vehicle. Every trip. That's ridiculous. I nodded toward the county road. "So build your own entrance." He stepped closer, voice lower now. "You understand how much money you're risking here." I looked him right in the eye. "You understand whose land you're standing on?" He called his lawyer right there. I called Mark. Mark got there 45 minutes later with a folder tucked under one arm, looking like he was headed to lunch instead of a property dispute. Bryce's attorney was on speakerphone threatening injunctions and damages. Mark listened, didn't interrupt, then finally said, calm as ever, "Please file." I'd love to walk a judge through unauthorized commercial traffic, property damage, and written notice being ignored. Dead silence. Then Bryce ended the call. That afternoon, the entire site shut down. No trucks, no movement, no noise, just stillness. And I won't lie, that quiet felt incredible. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then Bryce came back. Different truck this time. Different expression too. Less swagger. More frustration. He stood by the gate and said, 5,000 flat for temporary access. I leaned against the fence post. No. 10. No. Be reasonable. I am. He rubbed his forehead. Ethan, this project has deadlines. I nodded. Then I'd stop wasting time. He looked like he wanted to say something ugly. Instead, he took a breath and said, 100 per trip. 200. This is extortion. No, I said. This is billing. Luke nearly spit out his drink. Bryce glared at both of us. Then he asked for 24 hours. By the next afternoon, paperwork arrived. Mark reviewed every page, then added enough clauses to make sure nobody got creative later. Vehicle count monitored at gate. Weekly invoices. Payment due every Friday by 5 p.m. Late payment meant gate locked until funds cleared. Any damage to the driveway paid separately. Insurance liability on Dalton Ridge. No exceptions. Bryce hated every word of it. Signed anyway. That evening, I installed the digital traffic counter and backup camera. Mounted both right beside the gate. Every vehicle triggered a count. Time-stamped. Recorded. No arguments. First Monday they reopened. At 6 a.m. sharp. The gates slid back. Truck 1. Truck 2. Dump trailer. Pickup. Excavator. Concrete mixer. Crew truck. Back and forth all day. By Friday the count read 63. I sent the invoice. $12,600. Bryce wired payment at 4:47. Not a minute early. I could practically feel how mad he was through the confirmation email. Week 2, 51 trips. Week 3, 70. Then utility trenching started, and numbers jumped higher. Flatbeds carrying pipe, fuel trucks, workers, stone deliveries. By the end of month 1, they paid more than 40 grand. And every Friday, like clockwork, the wire came through. Bryce tried adapting. Bigger loads, fewer runs, crews riding together. Deliveries stacked tighter, smart moves. Saved him some money. But there was only so much he could control when an entire subdivision was under construction. Rain came in late fall and heavy trucks tore ruts near the shoulder. Per contract, Dalton Ridge paid repairs. Fresh gravel, compaction, drainage grading. Mark made sure every invoice got documented. Bryce signed everyone. Never happily. One afternoon, maybe 6 months in, I was checking the counter when Bryce pulled up alone. Didn't storm out this time. Didn't slam doors. He just leaned against the hood and looked exhausted. He said, "You enjoying this?" I thought about it, then told him the truth. Not really. That caught him off guard. I said, "I would have preferred you knocked on my door and treated me fairly from the beginning." He looked down the driveway, then out toward the build site. Frames were up now. Roofs going on. A whole neighborhood taking shape. He gave a short laugh. "You really cost me." I said, "You cost yourself." He nodded, and for the first time since we met, he actually looked embarrassed. Then he got back in the truck and drove away. After that, something shifted. He still hated paying. The attitude changed. No more pretending. No more acting like I was invisible. If crews needed to pause because I was backing out, they waited. If deliveries ran late, someone called. Small things, respect. Funny how expensive that lesson had to become before it clicked. Month 8 rolled into month 10. The subdivision kept growing. Streetlights, sidewalks, landscaping, families touring model homes. And every week the gate kept opening, then closing, then another invoice going out. By month 14, Bryce called. His voice sounded tired. Older almost. He asked if we could meet. We stood by the gate again where all this started. He looked at the traffic counter, then at me, then finally said, "I'm done paying weekly." I crossed my arms. He said, "I want permanent easement rights." And I knew right there, the real negotiation was just beginning. I looked at Bryce for a second and honestly had to stop myself from smiling. Because 14 months earlier, this man had stood in my driveway acting like I should feel lucky he wanted to use it. Now he was standing in the exact same spot asking permission. Funny how time works. He cleared his throat and said, "I'll offer $30,000 for a permanent easement." I didn't answer right away. Just leaned against the gatepost and looked past him toward the subdivision. You could hear nail guns in the distance, saws running, workers moving around houses that hadn't existed a year ago. A whole neighborhood built on land nobody wanted until suddenly it was worth millions. Then I looked back at him. 50. He shook his head immediately. "Come on, Ethan." I shrugged. "Then keep paying weekly." He rubbed his jaw. I could tell he'd rehearsed this conversation before driving over. Probably figured he'd wear me down. Maybe thought after all that time I'd be eager to be done with it. Truth was, I wasn't in a rush. The agreement worked just fine for me. He said, 40. I stayed quiet. He added, paid in full. This week. Still didn't answer. Bryce gave me a look somewhere between frustration and disbelief. Then he laughed under his breath. "I swear you enjoy this." That time I smiled. Little bit. He stared at me another second, then reached out his hand. 40. I shook it. Mark handled paperwork. By Friday, the wire cleared. 40,000. Clean. Permanent easement defined exactly where the driveway crossed the rear boundary and nowhere else. Dalton Ridge got access. I kept full ownership. And just like that, the fight that started with trespassing finally ended with signatures. Or at least that's what I thought. A week later, Bryce showed up again, this time with 2 paving contractors. He walked the driveway from the county road all the way up to my garage. Measured, talked numbers, checked drainage. I finally asked him what he was doing. He looked at me and said, "We tore this thing up." "I'm fixing it." I said, "Contract only required gravel repair." He nodded. "I know." Then looked down the drive and gave a tired smile. "And frankly, I never want to argue with you over road conditions again." 2 weeks later, crews arrived. Removed the rough gravel top. Regraded everything. Compacted the base. Laid fresh black asphalt, smooth as a runway. Edge to edge, quarter mile. Perfect. I stood on my porch that evening watching sunset reflect off brand new pavement and honestly had to laugh. When I built that driveway the first time, I spent weeks hauling gravel and running equipment myself. Now, because one developer couldn't take no for an answer, I had a better road than I ever planned on building. Luke came by with a cooler like always. We sat on the tailgate and looked down the drive. He cracked open a beer and said, "You realize this might be the pettiest legal victory in county history." I laughed. Might be. He tipped the bottle toward the pavement. Worth it. And yeah, it really was. Once houses started selling, things got quieter. Families moved in, kids riding bikes, people walking dogs. A normal neighborhood. Most of them had no clue what happened before they got there. To them, the paved road was just part of the view. A few longtime locals knew. Word spread. Small towns always talk. At the hardware store, people would grin and ask, "Gate still charging admission?" At the diner, somebody bought my coffee and called me the toll booth king. Even Sheriff Daniels joked about putting up a speed limit sign. Bryce and I crossed paths now and then after that. Never became friends. Probably never will. But something changed. He'd nod. I'd nod back. Simple. Respect. No games. No pretending. One afternoon, maybe 6 months after the easement deal, I saw him standing near the model home watching a landscaping crew work. He noticed me and walked over. He said, "You know, if I'd offered fair terms day one, I would have saved a fortune." I said, "Probably." He shook his head. "Instead, I spent more than anyone needed to." Then he looked right at me. "You taught me something." I laughed. "That expensive?" He smiled, apparently. Then he headed back toward the sales office. And I stood there for a minute thinking about all of it. Because the truth is, it was never really about the money. Sure, the money helped, a lot. Between weekly access and the easement, Dalton Ridge paid me $134,400. That changed some things. Paid off equipment. Built a detached shop. Put money aside I hadn't planned on having. That part mattered. Deeper than that, it was about something simple. Respect. People with power get used to hearing yes. Get used to assuming their timeline matters more than yours. Their investment matters more than your property. Their plans matter more than boundaries. And every now and then, somebody needs reminding that ownership still means something. That no still means no. That asking matters. And if you ignore all of that, sometimes the bill comes due. A lot higher than expected. Even now, every time I pull onto that smooth black driveway, I remember the sound of those trucks stopping cold at that locked steel gate. The look on Bryce's face. The silence after all that confidence disappeared. And yeah, maybe part of me still enjoys that memory more than I should. My wife says I grin every time I drive past the easement line. She's probably right. Would I handle it differently now? Honestly, maybe I'd still build the same gate. Maybe I'd buy an even bigger lock. Hard to say. But I'll ask you this. If somebody rolled onto your land, ignored your warning, and acted like your property was theirs because it was convenient, what would you have done? Would you have cut a deal? Called the sheriff? Taken them to court? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Shut the gate. Hand them an invoice. And let reality teach the lesson? Drop your answer in the comments, because I genuinely want to know. And if you enjoy stories where arrogance gets expensive and boundaries actually matter, hit like, subscribe, and stick around because trust me, around here, land has a funny way of revealing exactly who people really are.